my hygiene, he was convicted in 2020.
Yeah. Same charge. Every rain, high tides, constant weather.
Okay, well, I guess, let's go ahead and get started. Last week, we had been panicking because somebody had asked us to teach a class on 1 Corinthians. And, no, what do we do? How do we get ready for a class? You know, whether it's in front, you know, like I'm standing up here, or you're just doing one-on-one, face-to-face with somebody. And so we came up with a few different things on last week of some background info that we need to get before we start. And one is, you know, find out who the author is and find out why the author wrote it, and the history of the church, the geographic location, and the influence that it may have had on the local congregation. That I take that term back. We'll get to that. It wasn't a local congregation. Then the political and cultural situation, which you can kind of combine into two. You notice also that the secular history, we could combine that with the political as well, and kind of that have like a grab bag category. And then references in the Bible. So now, how did you do last week with your homework? just kidding. Yeah. So we came up with some answers, and so here I can kind of go through what might be the thought process of someone who's getting ready to teach 1 Corinthians. And so some of the stuff is easy, like when we talked about this last week, who the author is, Paul, the apostle, and find out why the author wrote it, and on a, you know, helicopter scale, 30,000 foot, maybe even scale, that because there's divisions in the church, there's problems, and he heard about them from the household of Chloe, and the history of the church there. So now that's where you're kind of getting into, okay, I've only got a few days to look this up. So what do I do? So most people today, what they would do is they would go to one of the AI tools and look at it. And so I went to Microsoft Copilot is what I used. And for the history of the church, this is what it came up with. Did I put that on here? No, I just wrote that one down. So here's what it said. So it started as a result of Paul's work there, as showed in Acts 18, 1 through 18, which we looked at. And then this blurb, most scholars estimate that the Apostle Paul first arrived in Corinth around AD 52, around his second missionary journey. This is the terms that they use because that's what, you know, what the commentaries and all that have down. And the AI is pulling from all those things. It's pulling from Wikipedia. It's pulling from commentaries that are available online, or there's websites called Bible Ask, other ones like that have actually pretty good information. And it said this dating is based on clues from the book of Acts and external historical markers, such as the tenure of Gallio. I found out how to pronounce that. I kept tripping over that. Gallio is Gallio. So like galley, like a kitchen on a ship, and Gallio. I was saying like Galileo, adding an extra syllable. It's Galileo. But he's a proconsul of Achaia, which is the southern region of Greece. And which is well attested in Roman records around AD 51. And there's this inscription that was found in the Temple of Apollo with Galileo's name on it, and it was so there's secular records that show that what happened in Acts 18 probably happened around AD 50, AD 52. So in this case, probably what we know, or you could go look up what that said, is probably correct. It's a good practice, I'd say, to whatever you find whenever you get summaries from any kind of AI, to look it up if you don't already know, from your knowledge. If something looks, suspicious, then go look it up and find out. There's an example of this that I'm gonna show you whenever we get to it. So that's the history of the church there. Paul I don't like to say he started it, but he did say in 1 Corinthians 3 that Paul planted. He used the word himself that he planted. But that's probably to individual church members. We'll get back to that. References, we haven't got there yet. So the geographic location and the influence that it may have had. And where's Richard? I got the map. Actually, this one here, because he was saying, whenever you go on Wikipedia, there's a map, and this was the map that showed up, which is actually pretty good, although it's I guess you can see it pretty well. Let's see, my pointer's not super strong, but here's the southern portion of Greece, which is also called the Peloponnese. When you hear that, or Peloponnesia, that's what it's talking about. It's almost an island that's just connected with this isthmus, and then Athens is right on the other side of it. So their location, the location of the church there in Corinth, had a large impact on the church and its work, because Corinth was okay. I did. So here's I thought this was kind of important, and this is the Roman Empire between the 1st and 3rd centuries, and the trade routes and what was traded in between. And you can't probably see that, but so forward. So I zoomed in some on Greece. So here's Athens here, and what do you see? So these blue lines are major sea trade routes. So you've got them, and they're mainly this way, but Athens was part of that too, so I'm not sure exactly how that works, but it goes right over, right up to Rome. So that's one of the major routes. So given that, it was a major city, Corinth was, in the Roman province of Achaia, located in the Isthmus of Corinth, like we just saw, which is a narrow land bridge connecting the mainland Greece with the Peloponnese. This strategic position made Corinth a bustling hub for trade and travel between the Aegean Sea to the east, Aegean Sea to the east, and the Ionian to the west. Ionian. And, okay, so looking at this blurb that Copilot gave us, is there anything, any issues that you can see that, that you would say, that's suspect, I would want to look at that further? Because that's as we're being the teacher, we're going to use this as our background for our class. We want to make sure that that we don't just take this as, oh yeah, everything that it came up with is right, because you can't trust AI like that. I think you could trust it to a certain extent, but it's kind of a trust but verify thing for depending on the AI that you use. I don't think I've heard that ChatGPT isn't very good. This seems to be pretty good. And I think Richard used a little bit of it, and he did the same thing whenever he put his Acts lesson together. And he kind of took it, and then he crafted everything manually from what he got. And the results were pretty good. And we had a good lesson with that, or a good series. But I don't see anything here that would make me go, from what, the maps that we just looked at and my knowledge and what I've read and everything, this sounds pretty good. Let's look at the next two things on the geographic location. So urban setting, the Christian community likely gathered in private homes rather than a dedicated church building, as formal church structures did not exist yet. Archaeological evidence and textual references, e.g. Paul's letter, suggest gatherings in homes of wealthy patrons like Gaius or Chloe who could accommodate groups. Thoughts on that? Does that make sense when you look at that?
Yes.
We have it's nice when we have a group of experienced Christians here. Some of us may see things that someone else doesn't, but no one sees anything. Okay, and that makes sense, because what we know, Chloe's mentioned, and we'll get. I should probably do that. Anyhow, Chloe was mentioned in the first chapter of 1 Corinthians, because that was well, let's turn there real quick and just look at that verse. 1 Corinthians 1. And verse 11.
What chapter?
So 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 11. 1:11. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 11, we had a preacher that preached for us out of Santee once, and every time he made a scriptural reference, he repeated the scripture 4 times before he ever read it. And so make sure everyone had time to get to it. I appreciate that, because my memory's not that great and I'm slow. So what does it say there? It says, "For it has been reported to me by Chloe's people that there is quarreling among you, my brothers." So Chloe's people, what does that mean? But I know what my mind would lead to a conclusion. Any other thoughts about what that could possibly be talking about? Is there any other possibilities? Kim?
It makes me think that people are meeting in Chloe's home. It's a group maybe there are other groups in the same area that are meeting in somebody else's home, or Chloe's relatives who are members of the church, who are also meeting with other members of the church, and they're reporting back.
Right, so what, and kind of the corollary to that would be, that that's not a large group, it's not like a church building, but so that's making sense with what that summary is saying. And so gathering in homes of wealthy patrons so they can accommodate groups. Most homes in those days probably didn't have room to have a group of people meeting in. Now, what's the other location in the New Testament that we know that might have been able to accommodate large groups? It's not the temple. We know that's a given. And synagogues, okay, so you have the synagogues. Now after that, and that at the start, that was probably the case, but then when the Jews started getting irritated at Paul and irritated at the Christians, then that kind of dried up, right? And Kim.
That comment leads me to the thought that I cannot imagine, please correct me if I'm wrong, if there's something I'm missing, that believers, people who've been baptized, people who wanted to meet on the first day of the week and take communion, I can't imagine they were doing that in the synagogue. Is there any idea that they would meet in a synagogue for that?
I wouldn't, and it doesn't sound like it would be something that would be a real friendly place for them to do that. Because and maybe early on it did, but as time progressed, we find out, at least in Jerusalem for sure, and Paul's reception as he went from city to city and in Asia was at first there were some that accepted, and then it blew up. But that was kind of a fishing question, because I was looking for the school of Tyrannus in Ephesus, and that might have been a place that was big enough for a larger group. Who knows how big it was? Who knows? But if it was a school, it was larger than a home. So, from what we're seeing and from what we know, that they gathered in private homes rather than dedicated church building, that's making sense. And also with a group like the church of believers at the time, the followers of the way, this was new. It wasn't organized. It was being organized, and you could see that it starts popping up in Roman history later on. But right now, in AD 50, which is only, 20 years after Jesus died or so? Not that long. It's very, very early on. So we could accept this, and this could be something that you could use as you're teaching. You could bring this up. And so as you're studying with somebody, this isn't something, the things that we're talking about, unless they were a very analytical person, a lot of these things weren't things that you would say, okay, we need to look at all of this before we can open up the book. Probably be best just to open up the book and start looking at it, and then incorporate these things in as you're looking at the scriptures, right? Not like I'm doing. But my purpose was to help us to get ready to teach someone else. Cultural environment. Corinth was cosmopolitan. So what does cosmopolitan mean? Anybody know off the top of their head what cosmopolitan means? Not a magazine.
I was gonna say that.
So it's just it kind of just means a city that's on the international stage, right? That they have a mix of different people. In this case, Greeks, Romans. You have Jews and others living there. They don't mention any of the others, but because it's a trade route, right? You have people from all around the world are coming through Corinth.
Sounds like San Diego.
We have people coming through San Diego, right? That when we see it happening, right? Yeah, and because there's ports, large ports that can harbor the ships, the large ships that come through. They've got the facilities. So Corinth was cosmopolitan, with Greeks, Romans, Jews, and others living there. Is known for wealth, commerce, and also moral laxity, which shaped the challenges that Paul addressed in his letters, e.g. divisions and immorality. Issues with that statement, thoughts on that statement, or that's a summary. That's what AI would call a summary. Anything in there suspect that you would look at and you go, maybe I need to look at this a little bit further. The one statement that kind of triggered something in me was and it's kind of easy to pass by because is wealth and commerce is true. We know that. But moral laxity. So where did AI get that? Michelle.
And doing my research, I found that in that particular area, because of all the shipping, they worship two gods. One is Poseidon, and the other was Aphrodite. So they had a lot of sexual immorality going on during that time because of those, the one in particular, which was Aphrodite.
Right. So that the temple of Aphrodite, and there's accounts that you read of. I won't go into it, but what happened in those temples. Now, if you look it up. There's arguments against that too. So that's something to take into account, because most of these other things don't have arguments against it, but that particular one does. So it could go either way. Kim.
I'm sorry, my constraint, but which particular one, the moral laxity or the temple of?
The moral laxity.
There's a question about whether there was moral laxity in general in Corinth.
And over the area, there's more in Corinth than say Athens or other areas. Ron.
Well, if you go back to the cosmopolitan thing, where it was a mixture of people coming from different regions, they brought their beliefs and their heresies and their idolatry and everything else with them. So I think that would probably cause this moral laxity.
So, and the question then ends up in comparison to what? Right, that any other cosmopolitan city or city, that large city in the Roman Empire would be similar to that. But this seems to elevate it a little bit over the other cities. And there's discussions about that, about how the people from Athens are, trying to make Corinth look bad, and so it could be either way. So whenever you come up with something like that, what do? Well, just leave it out, right? Because you don't know for sure. But was it in comparison to God's morals? Yeah, it was lax. But almost all of the other cities in the Roman Empire are too. So that would be an issue that they would have to face. Absolutely. John.
I'm not sure if I'm getting the quote right, but there was a saying that said, don't encourage, meaning boisterous or moral. I have to look
It
it up,
was.
find out where.
Yeah.
You heard that?
I heard that too.
Okay.
Corinthanize or something like that. Yeah, I did hear that. So there is that. All right, so let's not beat that one. So the political situation now, the Roman governance and status. So Corinth is in the first century, it's a Roman colony. It was reestablished by Julius Caesar in 44 BC. After its destruction by Rome in 146 BC, and as a colony, it enjoyed privileges similar to those of Italian cities, including local autonomy under Roman oversight. The city was strategically located in the Isthmus of Corinth, making it a hub. We know all that. Roman officials such as proconsuls governed the province of Achaia with Corinth as its capital. This meant that Roman law and administration were dominant, and loyalty to Rome was politically advantageous. So, thoughts about that? I'd say most of that is just this. There's good, strong history behind it to local autonomy.
So you're saying the Roman law was the dominant law there?
Yeah, since they were part of the Roman Empire, Roman Empire, we'll go back to. So everything in pink there is the Roman Empire. That's 181-17 or 81-17. So it was probably pretty similar at the time with some minor adjustments. So yeah, they were under Roman rule. They were right there in the heart of it. So the political situation was, say that's pretty accurate. There's the word cosmopolitan again, Romans, Jews, Greeks, freedmen, and slaves. Political power was concentrated among Roman citizens and wealthy elites who often held multiple offices. These positions were tied to status and wealth rather than democratic ideals. Patronage systems were common, where influential patrons provided benefits to clients in exchange for loyalty and support. So unless you're familiar with Roman history at all, you would look at that, okay, yeah. And it's from what I know, that's pretty accurate. They had a patronage system that was common in the heart of the Roman world, and the positions were tied to status and wealth rather than democratic ideas. Very much true. To my knowledge, I don't have perfect knowledge, but that seems like that's pretty good. The city's prosperity came from trade and commerce, and it gave rise to a politically influential merchant class. Economic success often translated into political clout, reinforcing social stratification. Public benefaction, funding games, temples, and civic projects was a way for elites to gather honor and political influence. Again, yeah, if you look at the Roman history that I listened to, that was it to a T. They did that all the time. And so that, and the last one, religion and imperial politics. The imperial cult, the worship of the emperor, was politically significant. Participation in emperor worship demonstrated loyalty to Rome and could secure favor. This created tension for early Christians who refused such practices, sometimes leading to social and political marginalization. Thoughts on that?
Saying participation in emperor worship, the type of worship were they doing?
So all you had to do, if they would bring the Christians in, is some. Well, that's too much detail. All they wanted was they had like an image of the emperor and a little altar, and you would just do a little sacrifice for it. Maybe just a few grains of something, of wheat or some kind of grain. And it's, that signified that you viewed the emperor as a god, or past emperor as a god. And that
Christians refused to do that.
sometimes they would whenever it got down to brass tacks, it would be either do this or you get whipped or get killed.
So
So now at the time in Corinth that was in the Roman Empire in general in that area. I think that was building up, and then whenever Nero hit, that kind of went up, and I'm trying to think of the other emperor. I can't remember if he was before Nero or after, but it got pretty bad there in the last part of the first century for Christians. But right now, it wasn't, because they were under the radar at the time of the Roman Empire. At the time of the writing of 1 Corinthians, so they didn't have that really to deal with. So yeah, that was there, but was it an influence on the Christians in Corinth at the time? Probably not so much from what I could see. Later on, yes, absolutely it did. Okay, but Co-Pilot, which I thought was really interesting, didn't mention anything about idolatry. And if you know anything about the text of 1 to 2 Corinthians, that's a huge issue for the Christians at the time. So this is, I asked Co-Pilot specifically about idolatry in Corinth in the first century, and this is what came up. Now, idolatry wasn't just a private act of devotion. It was woven into daily life and civic identity. And we know if it's anything like Ephesus, where they have the Temple of Diana and the little, I forget what the idols were, but they had the silver idols almost in every shop and in front of every house. There's probably something similar to that in Corinth. So archaeological and literary evidence shows that temple dining rooms hosted banquets where meat from sacrifices were served, and that invitation to cultic meals were common, and declining them could mean social isolation. And get into 2 Corinthians, going to 2 Corinthians after this, that's where this really comes into place, or comes into play. And also the Isthmian Games and other public celebrations were often involved in offerings to the gods. And what's not mentioned here is, and that I would want to do more research, because there's something in my mind telling me that in the marketplace, whenever you would buy meat, that you wouldn't know if it had been sacrificed to an idol or not. And that never came up. That would be something that's worth looking at, because that's a huge influence on the Christians at the time and getting food. Right, and the itself.
What were the, Islamic?
Yeah, Isthmian, so that's in reference to the isthmus. That's just that piece of land. So I think that's just talking about like a games similar to like the Olympic Games where they have the runs.
Okay, I'm thinking about right now, when I'm thinking about those kind of games that offer stuff to the guys, I'm thinking about Mayan culture, I guess. Where they used to sacrifice humans, roll their heads down the pyramid or the temple. I guess that was Mayan culture.
Yeah, that was I hadn't heard that. Wow.
Yeah. They played, the basketball originated, I guess, from that, because they used the heads to build the baskets, stuff like that.
Yeah, so probably,
Worship the gods that way.
as far as I know, these weren't like that.
No.
Yeah, it was, they would get like whoever won would get like a laurel crown, or something like that. So, that's, we are almost out of time. I was wanting to get to the first chapter. But that, like I said, all of those things that we just went through, and whatever else you would find out about whatever, book you were looking at, whatever letter you were looking at, that would maybe be a process to start with, and everyone would be, you personalize it for yourself, however, you're preparing. But I would say that even commentaries that you read about books, any commentary about 1 Corinthians, you would have to do the same thing. Be careful in what they say, because the commentaries, people who write those, they're just scholars. They're just humans, like the rest of us. And so you can't necessarily rely on them as you rely on the scriptures. Are they references that you could use? For sure, but just be careful with them. Ron. You thought you were going to.
Another thing is when you're ministering to somebody or studying with them, and they may not even know how to navigate through a Bible.
Absolutely not. You're right.
And when you tell them turn to 1 Corinthians, they're probably going to say, okay, where is that? And then their next question is going to be, what is Corinthians? What does that mean? Yeah. It's kind of sad, but it's true. What is Acts? You say Acts, turn to Acts. Well, what does that mean?
Right, they have, yeah.
Don't have a clue as to what that is.
So don't make assumptions
Right.
about things like that.
Yeah, so if you had this information that you gave, which is very detailed, by the way, you have an answer, you're ready with an answer. Corinth was established, well, the church at Corinth was established, and all of that.
So you're exactly right. And individually, with whoever you're studying with, that would be because you're building up a relationship with them, right? You add that first class, or maybe the talks that you had that led up to that, you would find out kind of where they were, you know, if they knew anything about the Bible at all. And it's hard because like you can't tell them to turn the page, you know, whatever on the Bible, because their page numbers are all different. Unfortunately. So table of contents is your friend, right? Yeah. And that tells them what page number to go to. And yeah, what does that word Corinthians mean? I've heard it before, but I have a clue. Yeah, excellent point. So we're out of time. Next week, we're going to dive into the text and look at it and kind of keep looking at it like you just brought up. You know, some that you're going to have different levels. What's somebody who's reading this going to think? What are the? I mean, we can't look at all the eventualities, but we need to be thinking about that as we're going through the text. So thank you so much for your attention and your comments, and we'll dive into the text next week. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So for those of you on the stream, we're going to stop it and then start a new one with hopefully the PowerPoint.